I'm not sure if perhaps there's something wrong with me, but media doesn't make me cry. Not movies, or books, or TV shows. Don't get me wrong, I appreciate a good story, and I revel in a cathartically tragic tale, but those emotions for me stir beneath the surface. That's not to say I never approach the point of tears, but fascinatingly enough, when I do get closest, it's normally from a video game. This is something that's puzzled me for a while. I mean, video games are a new, immature medium in the grand scheme of things, and usually focus the least on narrative as they've got things like gameplay to juggle as well. Nevertheless, they provide an X factor that disarms me. I've recently realized what I believe that element is. An emotion that video games are uniquely equipped to deliver above all other mediums. Regret. Now, just to be clear, I'm talking here about a more visceral and emotional feeling than the standard sort of, man, I regret falling into that pit sort of feeling that just about any video game can give you. While video games can certainly deliver you on that feeling, they can also deliver quite well on the deeper, more, I might even say soul-crushing form of regret. Think less, dang, I regret leaving that coupon I wanted to use at home, and more, I really should have called Grandma more often before she passed. Now, why might that be? Why exactly can a given game tap into this emotion so effectively? And what elements, specifically, serve to strengthen the effects? That's what we're looking to answer today, and I've got a few theories. I'm sure we're all familiar with regret in one way or another. It's dissatisfaction with the choices you've made in the past. The thought that had you done things differently, you'd be better off. A lingering on the counterfactual of your life. Or, summed up in 2 words, what if? What if scenarios are a popular topic of conversation in a myriad of fandoms. They can be interesting scenarios to ponder. They can even end up being explored by the creator themselves in what if or alternate universe stories. But for me, those have a hard time coming across as anything but tacky and gimmicky. It can be hard to invest in not the story, but a possible story, as anyone who's touched multiverses in the last decade or so can attest to. However, there is a medium that naturally enables the exploration of what-if scenarios. Video games. This is because, by their nature, if a video game gives a player agency, it necessarily creates a what-if scenario, an alternate series of events if the player makes different choices on replay. And if that alternate scenario is different and compelling enough, it can be a powerful thing. Because when you're replaying a game, you may not merely think that the grass is greener on the other side, you'll know it. And that is a perfect recipe for regrets. In Fire Emblem 3 Houses, after saving some students from a nearby military college, I received an offer to teach there, and I chose to become the primary educator of the class of students hailing from the Adrestian Empire, one of the 3 major powers on the continent. I sent my students out risking life and limb with not just theoretical education, but a practical one as well. Along the way, I bonded with my students especially, but also the rest of the student body and the faculty to an extent. I even got pretty close with Edelgard, the heir to the Adrestian Empire, and one of my best students. I learned of her surprisingly tragic upbringing, and the uncompromising ideology it formed within her. She even invited me as a guest of honor to her coronation. And then she marched an army against the church and academy, the very institutions and people that I'd fought so hard for all this time. In an instant, she'd revealed herself as a liar, a traitor, a mole, an apostate, and quite likely complicit in the death of my father. I'd been deceived. The sympathetic girl who had been the best and brightest among all my students now stood before me, the mastermind of a terrible plot and commander of an enemy army. Was the girl I knew a mere mask? Was everything I thought we had together a lie? But this was not the apex of regret in this experience. After all we'd been through together, I still trusted Edelgard. I figured she must have had a good reason for her actions. Besides, the Archbishop of the Church was starting to creep me out a bit anyways, so I sided with Edelgard, and together we fought against the Church, as well as the other 2 powers on the continent. The trail we blazed led through the deaths of many of our old acquaintances from the Academy, but such is war. And this war was certainly just. We exposed corruption in the Church, unified the continent, and prepared the way for equality and meritocracy to reign in the Empire. So no, I didn't regret my decision to back Edelgard in the war. As I often like to say, Edelgard did nothing wrong. But one of the major selling points of Fire Emblem Three Houses was its multiple routes through the game. You could start again, teach a different class, and get a completely different story and experience. I quite enjoyed the game, and was willing to play more of it, so curiosity got the better of me, and I played again. This time teaching Dimitri's class, and ultimately siding with his government in exile during the war. This time things were rougher emotionally. Sure, before I intellectually understood the tragedy of the students from the other classes dying in the war, but this time, seeing the students that I had spent dozens of hours leading in my previous playthrough hit way harder. It didn't help things that the man I was killing these people in service to was a broken, vengeful, vicious person. I was killing my former students for the sake of a mad king on a delusional quest for revenge. Dimitri did end up mellowing out a bit, but our campaign did not cease, and soon we were striking at the heart of the Empire, at Edelgard. I watched her sacrifice her humanity in an act of desperation to escape a corner I had pushed her into. I led an army which seized her throne, averted the future she had hoped to build, and ultimately snuffed out her life. The credits rolled, as I was meant to revel in my victory, but it rang oh so hollow. And then music played. The Edge of Dawn is effectively the main vocalized theme for Fire Emblem Three Houses. I'd listened to it a fair bit before the game had even come out. I suppose you can imagine my surprise at the fact that it didn't appear even once during my first playthrough, and yet here it was. And immediately, it hit me. This wasn't Fire Emblem Three Houses' theme, it was Edelgard's. Specifically a lament of not just the long-gone peaceful days of youth, but also the future that could have been, had you sided with her. So of course it plays here, but not in Crimson Flower. A victorious Edelgard need not sing of what-ifs, or the partner and ally that slipped through her fingers. But this one, the one I spurned and killed, most certainly did. And that was where regret really hit me. The regret of tossing aside a former ally and masterminding her downfall. Only to find out that Edelgard, the protagonist, and Edelgard, the villain, were both hurt girls, and both wished desperately for someone to reach out to and understand them. The only difference is what I did to them, and I really didn't wish for either of them to suffer. Of course, in real life, regrets are rarely born from certainty. In real life, you don't typically know what would have happened had you gone a different way. You just know that you don't like what did happen. And likewise, video game regrets aren't limited to a second playthrough. In the life and suffering of Sir Brante, you take on the role of the titular Sir Brante, from birth all the way to your nation's plunging into civil war. It takes place in a fascinating world with an intriguing religion, stark class divides, and imported, for our purposes today, the ability to be revived after death, though only a limited number of times. I had squandered a couple of those lives in my youth, took chances perhaps I shouldn't have, lived a life riskier than could be advised, and generally got myself into a bit of trouble. Fast forward several years, and I'm well into my career as a judge. It's a tough job to do well. You want to rule on the merits of the cases and the law, but all too often, the side in the wrong happens to be a powerful noble with a long memory and vindictive disposition. Needless to say, I'd cultivated quite the list of enemies, all while unrest bubbled beneath the surface with a civil war foreseeable on the horizon. And here I was, a man with but one revive remaining. Use it up, and my next death would be final. It was in that precarious situation that I found myself receiving correspondence from an old friend of mine. Thomas and I went way back. We'd been friends since childhood. As young men, we attended the same university, and now as adults, we had both entered into careers serving the state. All the way through, we had each other's backs. And now Thomas was in deep trouble with some powerful people. In short order, he'd be killed. I could intervene, however doing so would cost me a life, leaving me with no safety net as the country plunged into strife and anarchy. I thought long and hard, but ultimately, I ignored him and left him to his fate. He died, permanently. I did survive through the war, carrying Thomas's memory with me as I fought against the corrupt empire. I didn't even die once in the war, and that made my choice sting all the more. I could have saved him, had I not let fear and cowardice get the better of me. I saw my actions when pressure and consequences loomed, and regretted them dearly. So that's the key then. Tough, impactful choices that'll bring about consequences that your player will feel regret from. Made all the better if the game mechanics push the player towards the decision they'll regret, like in Sir Brante, or where you give up something meaningful on either side of the choice. Well, it can certainly be effective. But one thing worth keeping in mind is that a video game is under no obligation to let a player know exactly what impact their choices had on the rest of the game. Meaning that at least on a first playthrough, you can get much the same effect with smoke and mirrors. In Doki Doki Literature Club, you play as your very own faceless self-insert MC. It's an aggressively cute, traditional romantic visual novel. I found it one day free on Steam, having not heard anything about it, and decided to give it a go. My journey started with my longtime friend Sayori, out of concern for my total lack of friends or, a life, invited me to join the titular literature club. I was immediately welcomed by the small, intimate group of exclusively cute girls who made it up. Sayori was of course there, serving as a familiar and friendly face, undoubtedly helping me to integrate with the rest of the group. Monica, the club president, was a steady hand guiding the group through some activities, though mostly just writing poetry, which, is literally literature, but there's more to literature than just that. Oh well, we'll have time to cover novels, treatises, short stories, etc. later in the year, I'm sure. Then there was Natsuki, who I didn't really mesh with super well, but hey, she bakes some pretty good cupcakes, so she was alright in my book. And finally there was Yuri, a bit of an introvert, and therefore relatable. I took quick interest in the books she enjoyed and found that once I got her talking about something that excites her, she revealed a nuanced outlook on life and a quiet intelligence behind those mysterious eyes of hers. That's of course not even to mention her hugely interesting personality and hobbies. It's so nice to have a girl who too can appreciate a well-crafted knife. The two of us hung out quite a bit in the club and even had some alone time as we made preparations for our club's contribution to the culture festival. So yeah, joining the club, it really helped me get out there and break the malaise my life had been in up to that point. I really want to thank Sayori for introducing me to such a great group of girls. No. I didn't know what to do with myself. I actually put the game down for about a week. I was shocked, yes, but also regretful. Because in retrospect, the signs were there. She was sleeping in, talking bad about herself, constantly implying that she was getting in the way, and I did nothing. I didn't notice, or didn't take those signs seriously. I didn't try to use that poetry minigame to try to pivot and give Sayori some attention. She'd introduced me to the club, and I basically abandoned her once she wasn't literally my only friend. What if I hadn't? What if I didn't let our relationship atrophy as I pursued some shiny new hottie? Well, the outcome would have been the same. Sayori's death is the turning point for the whole plot of Doki Doki Literature Club. Focusing on a different girl in the poetry minigame will get you different scenes with different girls leading up to it, but it won't save Sayori. But ultimately that doesn't matter. Because in the moment, you don't know that. In the moment, you really consider if it was your fault. It's not a fun emotion. Regret rarely is. But it's certainly powerful. And again, something very difficult to pull off in other mediums. Speaking of which, that comparison doesn't have to be strictly theoretical. There are loads of video games which have been adapted to film or television, which in theory can provide us a comparison between the emotional impact of analogous plot beats, with the main difference being interactivity or the lack thereof. Our case study here will be Danganronpa Trigger Happy Havoc versus Danganronpa the animation. Well, specifically looking at Case 1 and the lead up to it. Danganronpa, both the game and the anime, follow basically the same plot and premise. The protagonist/player character, Makoto Negi, finds himself imprisoned within the walls of the elite high school he was to attend, along with 14 incredibly gifted students in their respective areas of expertise. Anyway, what really matters is that you're all trapped in the school with no means of escape, unless you can manage to kill one of your classmates without the rest of your classmates deducing your guilt and convicting you of your crime. Certainly a, stressful environment, to say the least. Luckily, there was a familiar, friendly face enrolled at the school with me. Sayaka, an acquaintance of mine from middle school who had apparently gone on to become a majorly famous pop idol since then. Anyway, despite being so thoroughly out of my league, she was probably the nicest, most personable person to me, as we all got used to this new normal. I chose to spend a lot of my free time with her, and she generally seemed to be concerned about my safety and well-being. Just as things were beginning to settle into a new, strange but pleasant enough rhythm, our captor decided to throw us all a curveball by giving each of us a glimpse of a different video showing terrible things supposedly going on in the outside world. Apparently my whole family was bombed to oblivion, as an example, which, I'm gonna need some time to process that one. But there was no time to get hysterical, because Sayaka's video was apparently just as bad. In an instant, her emotional state had taken a sharp turn towards a cross between panic and depression. But she'd been there for me thus far, so I was there for her, comforting her in her time of need until she could calm down. Yeah, the school was terrible, but we'd get through it. Together. Not long after that, someone tried to break into Sayaka's room in the night. I would have invited her to stay in mine, but to avoid an appearance of impropriety, we swapped rooms instead. Now, I was the assailant's theoretical target, but at least Sayaka could rest easy. The next morning, Sayaka was nowhere to be seen at breakfast. Fearing the worst, I rushed to my room and, well... there she was. Dead. My one friend in this sadistic prison was gone. The next few hours were spent investigating the crime to bring her killer to justice. But the clues painted a peculiar picture. Once I put everything together, the truth was clear. Sayaka was no innocent victim. She was the one with murderous intent that night. No one ever tried to break into her room, that was all a lie, to convince me to switch with her, specifically so she could lure someone to my room and kill them. Then frame me for the crime thanks to my room being the scene of it. Of course, her plan failed since her would-be victim was able to defend himself and turn the tables on her. Though even so, I still got framed anyway since Sayaka was found dead in my room. The one person I trusted. One I had made the active choice to hang out with. The person I was sure I'd escape this prison alongside had pulled the wool over my eyes and almost got me convicted of murder. Looking back, I should have seen the betrayal coming. She was particularly unstable after those videos, after all. But I didn't want to see it, so I didn't see it. And that is where the regret in this game stemmed from. And it wouldn't be the last time, either. Though I won't be going into detail here, let's just say that it wouldn't be the last time my affections would hamstring my deductive reasoning. As previously stated, the anime follows basically the same plot as the game, though it is abridged somewhat so as to fit a 40-ish hour, very plot-heavy game into a single season of anime, roughly a tenth of the total runtime. As a point of reference, this whole sequence I went over took about 8 hours to play through when I was streaming the game. Oh, and speaking of which, I'm actually currently streaming Danganronpa 2 right now, Wednesdays at 10 p.m. Eastern time on twitch.tv/StevenCraftGaming. So yeah, come join me over there if you want. The Danganronpa streams in particular tend to be quite fun. But anyways, as I was saying, what the game covered in about 8 hours was covered in the anime in merely 3 30-minute episodes. That is to say that the shorter runtime combined with the fact that I had already experienced the plot may have been factors influencing my experience watching the anime. But, in my opinion, Sayaka's betrayal hits way harder in the game than the anime. And I do think that the interactive nature of the game is a significant, if not the leading reason why. I felt hurt and violated once I'd pieced together Sayaka's betrayal in the game, whereas in the anime it was just another plot twist. And I do think the interactivity of the game is a major reason why, in spite of the fact that just like in Doki Doki Literature Club, you can't do anything to prevent this outcome. The only real choices you have at this stage of the game is choosing who you hang out with. I did end up hanging out with Sayaka, but you didn't have to, and that choice has no impact on the overall story. Even so, the nature of an interactive medium, particularly in the case of Danganronpa, encourages a more active engagement with the story than a passive medium like television. The mere fact that I am Makoto in the game, and will have to take actions in his shoes, at least in my experience, made me really pay attention and analyze everything the story threw at me, since doing so would give me a leg up come trial. So even though I couldn't do anything to avert Sayaka's betrayal, the game had embedded in me certain expectations regarding the experience that led me to consistently analyze my relationship with her and come up with a theory of to where everything was headed. Then, when you're wrong, you feel the pain of being duped. Or if you're right, you feel the smug satisfaction of having anticipated the developments, both of which are quite satisfying reactions to experience. This is of course as opposed to a passive medium like television, where you certainly can still think about these sorts of considerations, but without gameplay mechanics, there's nothing pushing you to engage in that way. You're more than welcome to just sit back, relax, and let Kyoko's genius wash over you. In short, when I was playing Danganronpa, I got duped. When I was watching Danganronpa, Makoto got duped. And that makes all the difference. And there you go, some examples of how to elicit regret in your players. If I had to sum up our findings, I'd say you want to cause a negative event to transpire, often a death, that the player either is responsible for or feels responsible for. That feeling of responsibility can be garnered by keeping the effects of the player's actions vague, and or by mechanically encouraging their investment in and focus on the unfolding story. But that's just a couple different methods I noticed, and I'd love to read more in the comments. Are there any games you've played that stirred feelings of regret within you, and if so, how do you reckon they achieved that feeling? I'm sure you will all come up with some spectacular examples. Oh, speaking of which, I'd like to thank some spectacular examples of people, my patrons. Especially my $15 tier patrons, Alex Octoing and Ash Frances. But anyways guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. Do tell me in the comments if you want to see any more kind of along similar lines in the future. But until next time, I've been Simcraft and I'll catch you in the next video. Goodbye.